Depending on where you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to the Copyright Clearance Center's Town Hall on Business Advantages and Feasibility of Fair and Ethical LLMs. I'm Roani Levy, your host, and I am Licensing and Legal Advisor at the Copyright Clearance Center. We are thrilled to have you with us for this really timely conversation focused on responsibly trained AIs that are trustworthy and fair. Our aim today is to equip you with a practical understanding of why responsibly trained AIs make strong business sense and are indeed feasible to implement. We want you to leave with actionable steps to advance ethical and responsible AI practices within your organization. And importantly, we will also underscore the fundamental role of copyright and licensing in building truly responsible, trustworthy, and fair AI systems. For those that don't know the Copyright Clearance Center, here at CCC, we are experts in navigating the complexities of copyright in the digital age, and now specifically in the age of AI. We provide licensing solutions that simplify copyright clearance, enabling organizations to access and utilize content legally and ethically. This is especially crucial for AI systems where licensing is paramount for a range of uses, including training, fine-tuning, prompting, and RAG. And to that end, we have recently announced a new AI systems training license, which is designed to facilitate responsible AI development by providing a clear path for organizations to lawfully use copyrighted material for AI systems training for uses that are external to their organization. And this license, along with the annual copyright license for internal AI uses, underscores our commitment to responsible AI that recognizes the need for high-value, authoritative content and the importance of respecting rights holders. Now on with the show. It's a real privilege to introduce Ed Newton-Rex. Ed is a true visionary in the world of generative AI and a powerful voice for ethical practices. He is a passionate advocate for creator rights and responsible AI, and he's demonstrated this through his founding of Fairly Trained, which is a nonprofit that certifies ethically trained AI models. As a former VP of audio at Stability AI, a company known for democratizing generative AI technologies, Ed was a key leader in developing innovative audio AI solutions within this groundbreaking landscape. With experience at tech giants like TikTok and Snapchat, and a background as a composer, Ed brings a uniquely informed and creative perspective to the critical discussion of ethical and responsible AI in business. So we're really incredibly fortunate to have Ed with us today to share his insights on the business advantages of responsibly trained LLMs. And it's also my pleasure to introduce Jillian Bommarito. Jillian is a leading expert in AI governance and risk management with a unique blend of business acumen and technical depth. She is co-founder and chief risk officer of 273 Ventures, a legal AI company where she has helped global law firms create and implement responsible AI solutions. As executive director and head of governance of the Institute for the Advancement of Legal and Ethical AI, the ALIA Institute, and through her work with Clem, an LLM that uses responsibly obtained materials, Jillian has been at the forefront of developing and promoting ethical and responsible language models. Her deep understanding of financial oversight, privacy, and emerging tech governance, combined with her hands-on experience in LLM development, make her an invaluable voice in today's AI landscape. Jillian is exceptionally skilled in making complex issues understandable and actionable for businesses, as you will see today. And we are thrilled to have her expertise to eliminate the practical feasibility and business advantages of ethical AI. Welcome to you both. So Jillian, let's start with you. Perhaps you could briefly share your perspective on the current landscape of LLM training, highlighting the key governance and risk considerations for businesses.
Sure. And just to give everyone some background, we trained our own clean large language model and released it about a year ago. We were the first fairly trained large language model. And since then, the landscape, unsurprisingly, has shifted a lot. There's a lot of court cases now. We're seeing a lot more interest in AI that is responsible, that is ethical, and that is taking matters such as copyright into consideration. Whereas a year ago, there was less exposure to this area. Now, a lot of businesses are seeing that there are risks to ignoring these matters, and there are opportunities to set themselves apart and to build technology that will be able to withstand, wherever the environment goes in the future, to by embracing responsible and ethical AI.
Ed, from your vantage point at Fairly Trained and previously at Stability AI, can you give us an overview of why ethical and responsible training and licensing are so critical for the future of generative AI?
Yeah, I mean, look, what it comes down to, for me, I mean, stepping back from like what are the advantages of a business using ethical AI? Why is this important in general? It's important for the simple reason that generative AI, inescapably, generative AI competes with the work that it's trained on and the people behind those works. And so if you are, as an AI company, if you are training on people's copyrighted work without a license, you are then going to be competing with them, and you're going to be doing so unfairly, and many people believe, including me, illegally. And I mean, some examples. I mean, if you train a large language model on short stories, then your large language model will be able to create competing short stories. If you train an AI image model on stock photos, your model will be able to create competing stock photos. If you train a music model on music from TV shows, your model will be able to create competing music to license to TV shows. This is ultimately why, training data must be licensed. And at the moment, sadly, unfortunately, just in the last couple of years, many AI companies, not all of them, but many of them have started basically ignoring copyright and training on whatever they like. And I want to stress that it was not always this way. I've worked in what we now call generative AI for 14 years. And for 12 of those years, people did not train commercial models on copyrighted work without a license. Everyone understood and knew that it was illegal, that they would face serious ramifications if they did otherwise. But then a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 major models, major big companies that you've all heard of, decided to throw caution to the winds and see if they could get away with it. And everyone copied them because they have made so much money and because they have raised so much investment. And it led to this huge domino effect of incredibly unethical practices where AI companies are essentially stealing intellectual property. And until the courts catch up, they're getting away with it. And so that is why I think it's so important. And that is why creators around the world are protesting in such great numbers about what's happening.
Right. And to the point of the protests by creators, of course, we're seeing this happening in the court cases. So creators and rights holders are asserting their rights for I think we passed the 40 mark in terms of court cases in the US alone, and perhaps over 50 worldwide. But also, Ed, you've spearheaded a really powerful statement that has garnered, I believe, over 50,000 signatures today, right? Let me just read this statement. It's a simple but really, really powerful statement. Quote, "The unlicensed use of creative works for training generative AI is a major, unjust threat to the livelihoods of people behind those works and must not be permitted." I love how short, concise, and yet powerful that statement is. Tell me more about this initiative and the importance of it, and where do you see this going?
Yeah, so this was a statement that I published in October last year, so about 6 months ago. Published it with about 6,000 signatures. It now has 50,000 signatures, and the number is still rising. And the idea behind this was, that AI companies have used different arguments over time for why they should get away with what they're doing. And gradually, these are being, shot out of the water by people. And one of the arguments for a while that they were using was they were saying, look, it's just the big rights holders, it's just the dinosaur media companies who have an issue with what we're doing. And actually what we're doing is good for individual creators because they can all use these models and it's great. And I know lots of artists, and I know that every single one of them is livid about what AI companies are doing, but they don't often have a unified voice. And so the point of this statement was to provide something that, creators, individuals could sign, showing that, AI companies are lying when they say this. And, not just because of this statement, I'm sure, but for other reasons as well, largely AI companies are not using this line anymore. Like, it is increasingly impossible for AI companies to claim that their theft is justified by it being good for individual creators, because around the world, individual creators have made it abundantly clear that it's not okay. I mean, this was brought to the fore just last week in the UK, where 25,000 people have signed a letter to the culture secretary demanding that senior executives at Meta be brought in front of Parliament to answer questions on whether they have indeed been training on pirated material, and if so, why have they been doing that? And a huge number of authors turned up outside Meta's offices and started protesting. And I strongly believe that we are just seeing the start of these protests. And this is, speaking purely practically, I mean, I think there are many ethical reasons to use fairly trained models. It doesn't have to be certified by us. Any model that is ultimately fairly trained. But just even from a practical perspective, looking at businesses, you've got to bear in mind that right now, for better or worse, creators around the world in vast numbers, an overwhelming majority of them straight up hate generative AI. And a major reason for this, is, as we know from what they're saying, is because their works are being stolen to train these models that compete with them. And so I think, just as a business in general, when you're thinking about how to integrate generative AI, this is a major reason I think it makes sense to work with AI companies and AI models like Clem, like Jill's company and model, work with AI companies that are fairly trained, that have trained ethically. Because I think what companies are seeing who don't take this approach is they're seeing understandable backlash from creators, and creators, thankfully have a very powerful voice.
So, and we've heard this is not new, right? This tension between innovation, technology, and creators wanting to ensure that their works are respected. And with every new wave of technological change, we see this tension, and eventually it works out, and we find a way to ensure that creators are paid and their works are respected. And let's hope that trend that we've seen historically continues today, because it's absolutely vital. So I hope that everybody that's on this call that has not signed this statement does so at the end of this call. But let's go deeper into what does it mean to be responsibly trained. We've talked about copyright for sure. We've talked about the legal implications of not clearing the rights. But let's go a little bit more broadly from an operational point of view, from a practical point of view, beyond legal compliance. What does it mean to be responsibly trained? Jillian, maybe you could start us off with your experience with Clem, and of course, Ed, you could speak to us about the process about getting certified by Fairly Trained and what that's involved.
Yeah, so I can speak both specifically to the experience of training our Clem model, which, if anyone looks it up, is KL3M. And I can also speak more generally to what organizations are going through with respect to overall data governance and AI. So specifically with Clem, we were focused on gathering data that was free of any reliance on a fair use argument. So we had a multi-step process to ensure that all of the data that we trained on was not subject to copyright and did not have other use restrictions associated with it. If it was limited by Creative Commons license that didn't allow derivative works, things like that. But more broadly, for all organizations, the most critical element of responsible AI is data governance. Without that, you don't know what data is in the training at, whether it's at the initial training step, which you may or may not have insight into, or whether it's within your RAG database. Knowing what data you have where it came from, whether there are any restrictions associated with it, whether there are any risks, legal or otherwise, maybe reputational. Having a sense of where your data came from, what it is, what you can do with it is essential. If you, for example, have a lot of customer data or client data, can you use that for your own internal or external purposes with AI? Making sure that not only external data that you are either licensing or data that was in a model that you're using, knowing that there are appropriate rights to that data also applies to your own data, and knowing whether there are any kind of restrictions with respect to confidential information, things that are trade secrets for your company or for your clients, things that involve privacy regulations. There's a lot to consider, and having strong data governance policies, procedures, and technical guardrails helps ensure that you can successfully implement ethical and responsible AI.
Thank you, Jillian.
Yeah, and I can talk about the fairly trained certification process. I mean, and the first thing I'll say is that, I agree with Jill. I think what Jill touched on there in part was that there are, ethical AI training, involves more than just making sure that you own the rights to the content that you're training on. There are other things that I think people should bear in mind when they're training or fine-tuning models. I think a clear and obvious one being, how are you making sure that there is not, you're not reinforcing existing biases in your data set. That's something that the AI ethics community has been looking into for a good 6 or 7 years, and potentially longer. I think the starting point has to be, models that are trained on work where there is copyrighted work that is not taken without a license to do so. And so that's the only thing that we focus on at Fairly Trained. The certification process involves divulging your training data sources, us going through a due diligence process with companies like, with models like Clem, which we've done, and going through that training data, and checking where it's come from, checking that there is no copyrighted work in there that has not been licensed. Now, you may have licensed your data. It may come from the public domain. You may own it yourself. You may own it outright. You may own the rights. Some of it may be synthetic data. If there is synthetic data, and synthetic data is, it broadly is content that is itself created by a generative AI model, we actually go probably further than the law requires. Often, no copyright may exist in synthetic data, but we say that you can't just use synthetic data as a way to circumvent copyright law and to sort of launder copyright through another AI model and then have that AI model create lots of new works that you then train on. So we say that you have to go follow that stack back to the beginning and ask what the original model was trained on, and that has to hit these criteria. But so that is the process for this certification, and I think it's important for in practical terms for a number of reasons. I think if you use models that are not trained in this way, and many AI models out there, and all of the big ones that are in the news all the time, did not follow this approach, sadly. I think there are several risks, right? Like, I think ultimately there is always, it's been clearly shown that all of these models, without fail, sometimes output copyrighted work. They sometimes actually output copyrighted work. And that is a risk that for whatever you're using them for, you are going to then have copyrighted work in the outputs that you are generating. That is clearly a risk. You also face the issue that these models may ultimately be taken off the market and I think some of them will lose some of the lawsuits that have been brought against them. And at that stage, you're relying on a model, that ultimately will have been convicted of, or the company would have been convicted of huge copyright infringement, and that's a bad place to be. And you also, as I've said, face this potential backlash from the kinds of people who are impacted by this. And for the record, I think that the kinds of people who are impacted in a negative way by this training are going to expand and expand. It is a known it's a known fact that many AI companies in Silicon Valley are trying to replace a bunch of the world's labor right now. And that might sound preposterous, but I've been at, big tech dinners, secret tech dinners in Silicon Valley, where investors and entrepreneurs explicitly say this. That is what they are trying to do. And as you have more and more people whose work is replaced by these models, you're going to have more and more people saying, well, why is my work being used against me? And that, I think, is not a position that many businesses will want to support. So, I think there are lots of reasons there, to think carefully about this.
And maybe we'll get to this a little bit later, but a lot of people on the call today are not actually training models. They may be fine-tuning models. They may be in the process of selecting which models they would like to work with for their own internal business needs. What is it that they can do to better understand the ethical or responsible way of approaching even that selection process?
I mean, they can look for a fairly trained badge. We've certified 20 companies already, and on our website you can see them all, and so you can go there. I would not say only use fairly trained companies, because we're pretty small nonprofit. There will be companies that are fairly trained but that we haven't certified. I would say do your own due diligence. I know a number of companies do this already. It's not very difficult to find out what kind of AI company you're dealing with. To put it simply, if you're thinking about implementing OpenAI's APIs or that sort of thing, it's very easy to find out that they have trained on huge amounts of copyrighted work without a license, currently being sued by multiple people for doing this. And I would recommend not incorporating models like that. So I think your own due diligence is really important. I also would say, I think it's important to say that I don't think we should blame if companies feel compelled, because all their competition is using these models. If companies feel compelled to, I understand that. I think that a company just cannot put itself in a position where it is shooting itself in the foot by not doing something that everyone else is doing. And so I try not to judge too harshly companies who don't use fairly trained models, but who actually go and use alternative models. But I think that if you feel that you have to do that, and because again, I want to stress that frankly, the bad guys here are the AI companies who are not taking this approach, are the AI companies who are stealing creative work. And that is who we should be judging, not any companies who feel they're forced to use these alternative models. But I think if you are doing that, I would say still, please do what you can to advocate for fairly trained models. Write to the, if you have a relationship with that company, go and write to them. Go and say, look, I don't, can you tell me what your training data is? I don't like this. There are many things you can do stopping short of actually not using these models. And I think that is an important caveat for me.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. We all need to take some level of responsibility, even recognizing the fact that, yes, there are these models that are out there. It would be difficult not to use them altogether, but there is something that we can say to put some pressure on the LLM operators and AI developers to look at more responsible and ethical approaches, questioning them about where the data comes from, how they obtain the right. And when we integrate them into our own workflows to do what we need to do to make sure that the data that we then use, whether it's for fine-tuning or RAG or prompting, is properly licensed. So at least we play our responsible and ethical part as well. Thank you for that, which takes us nicely to maybe going a little bit deeper into the business case for ethical AI, and also to speak about the kind of the technical feasibility and costs associated. Some people may just throw their hands up and say, this is going to be too difficult, too costly, everything is moving so fast, I need to integrate AI, this is somebody else's problem. How do we encourage organizations to actually take on the challenge of approaching and integrating AI in their work in a responsible and ethical way? So the business case, and a few words as well on the technical feasibility and the cost considerations. Maybe Jillian, you could start us off because you've done this.
Yeah. And thankfully, I will say the cost has gone down since we went through this. One of the biggest considerations, I think, from a business perspective, Ed kind of touched on when he was talking about the outstanding cases and the fact that models may not continue to be available, is the business continuity risk. That's a huge risk to kind of putting all of your eggs in one basket, whether it's with one specific model or model provider, or whether it's to a certain group of models. And there's the business risk that those models may become limited, may no longer be available, or may be significantly altered in how they function. So if you are relying on one specific model to build everything downstream, your risk is tied to the outcome of that one specific model. So in terms of actionable items, having a flexible kind of AI system where you can use different models is key, not only from a copyright perspective and the risks associated with that, but just from a general business continuity perspective, and also being able to achieve the best outcomes. Like Rowaney said, things are constantly changing. It's a pro and a con because you have to build based on where technology is right now, but you want to build from the product or model that you're using, keeping in mind that things will change in the future. So the technology and the types of models that are achieving certain outcomes today were not even contemplated last year. The rise of small language models is showing that there is a different path and there's different architectures that are being developed. In 2 years, it could turn out that all of this is going to be a moot point because nobody is going to need these gigantic models trained on all of this data that was copyrighted that may or may not have been appropriately licensed. It may be a moot point because the technology is moving us in directions where smaller models are more capable, and more focused models on company-specific industries or their use cases can outperform these larger models with less money. So having an open mind and keeping in mind the changing nature of the technology is essential. And I want to add one thing to kind of dovetail off what Ed said previously with respect to transparency. There's a lot of data right now that you can't get. The only reason we really know what content some of the larger models were trained on is either because of prompting that people were able to use to see what the what the inputs to the models were, or the lawsuits. We're starting to see what some of the information was. But there are models out there and providers. With our CLEM model, we have completely open sourced our data set, our process for how we gathered the data and processed it. Kind of all of the steps we went through with Ed for our Fairly Trained certification, we've made public. And there are other groups who are looking to do similar things like that. So from a technical and business feasibility perspective, today there are a lot of resources out there to start your organization moving in the direction of responsible AI. And to add to Ed's point about, you may not be able to, from a business perspective, not use some of these models. So taking baby steps to do the right things is going to move your business and the industry and hopefully the whole world in the right direction of more responsible practices. So perhaps it's using an existing model, but then paying for content that you've licensed for RAG. That's a step in the right direction. And that specifically allows you to better plan your business expenses. You know exactly what the cost will be for licensing content versus having a potential unknown cost of, relying on a model that may no longer be available because their content was not properly obtained. You're muted, Roni.
Knew that was going to happen. Ed, I believe at Stability AI, you mentioned that initially all the training was done on cleared content, so the feasibility and initially, people didn't always just scrape and steal in order to train their AI. So tell us more about the business case and the feasibility of actually doing this.
Yeah, that's not the case at Stability AI. I mean, so my team at Stability, which was the music generation team, trained only on licensed data, but the wider company did not take the same view.
Right.
And
Thank
that
you
is
for
why,
that clarification.
yeah, and then that's why I ultimately quit the company. But I mean, yeah, I agree with what Jill said, and I think ultimately, I mean, for me also, I think the thing that people underestimate, the thing that, and I think this is going to be a bigger and bigger issue, is the backlash. I think integrating, even when, and I understand if you think you've got to integrate these models, but I really do think, and it depends what your business is, but if it's got any kind of touch point with people who are affected by this, you're going to see giant backlash, I think. I mean, I think a really good example is Adobe. Adobe are not fairly trained certified, and they have, there is just an incredibly large, vocal, and growing community of people who are very angry with Adobe right now. And I think more and more businesses are going to see this. And I think it's a real shame, because if you are more transparent, if you do use fairly trained models, I think that sets things up very differently for a very different relationship with people. So I would really bear that in mind. In terms of technical feasibility, again, this is not impossible to do. You may find you have to use certain models, but ultimately, I would say as a first step, go and find out whether there are models you can use, you can fine tune on, that are fairly trained. I mean, frankly, I'm not just saying this because Jill is here, but Clem is our only fairly trained large language model. Go and chat to Jill, like, as a first step, like, just get in touch and say, look, what can we do together? I go and find these companies and do what you can. And if your needs, aren't met, then, and you have to do something else, fair enough. But I would say at least try. Don't just assume this is if ultimately we believe that human creativity is important, and we believe in the value of the work being trained on by these companies and the rights of the people behind that work, then I think as a first step, we are obliged to see as individuals and as companies what we can do to support human creators, instead of just thinking it's not our problem. I really think we're obliged to do that.
And I think, as you and Jillian pointed out, the more the market is asking for ethical and fairly trained AI, the more the market will provide ethical and fairly trained AI. And that's kind of part of the responsibility of the people on this call, who are not themselves training AIs. They're not building foundation models. They are perhaps users of foundation models, but they have a role to play in bringing forward, through their asks, more fairly trained and ethically trained AIs.
Yeah.
So the call that we hear out there, that copyright protection might stifle AI innovation, misguided?
Totally misguided. There's this, the line AI companies sometimes use is, they say, well, if you require licensing, then it will kill small startups, and it will only be the big AI companies that can license all this data, pay the huge upfront licensing fees for this training data. But it's just garbage. I mean, you just have to look at what's happening. It's the big AI companies, it's the incumbents, the giants, who are taking what they want without permission and spending millions and millions of dollars lobbying various governments around the world to let them do so. And it is the new players, the startups, who are coming in and saying, this is like Clem, who are coming in and saying, this is not the way to do things, and actually we can do things better. And there are all these different approaches to doing that, which might be using public domain data. It might be doing revenue shares with data providers. There are ways of doing this without paying these huge upfront licensing fees. So no, copyright doesn't kill innovation at all. Respecting copyright doesn't kill innovation. Respecting copyright and licensing training data is the only way that the creative industries and the AI industry can both thrive in tandem. I mean, it's lobbying. It's ultimately all lobbying.
And in fact, there's an argument to be made that not respecting copyright is creating an unlevel playing field. Because if you have a lot of money to do the lobbying and to manage 40 court cases, those that are respecting copyright don't have the same kind of level playing field. So ensuring that everybody respects copyright is a way to level the playing field between the large and the smaller AI companies, as well as ensuring fair and equitable compensation for the resources that the AI innovators need into the future, right? And ensuring that creators continue to get paid and to play an important role. So we talked a lot about licensing. CCC's perspective is that responsible AI starts with licensing. I think that won't be a surprise to the folks on this call that know CCC. Ed, Jillian, tell us a little bit more about the role that licensing plays. You've mentioned already, Jillian, that it's becoming easier and easier, actually, all the time, to be able to train LLMs or to fine-tune LLMs responsibly. I mentioned earlier on the call that CCC has collective licenses, one that was recently announced for systems training, for external use, and the annual copyright license, which is a license that's been in the market for 45 years and now covers AI for internal business AI uses as well. So lots more resources, as you pointed out, marketplace solutions to facilitate ethical and responsible training. What are you seeing, Ed and Jillian?
Yeah, I mean, look, AI companies, many of them, not Clem, but others, argue that they shouldn't have to license training data because it's infeasible. They need too much data. And this is just not true in an age where there are so many options for licensing training data. For a start, you can go straight to big media companies and license from them. There are at least 30 major deals already between big rights holders and AI companies, for licensing training data. And that's to say nothing of the many, many more that go unreported in the press. You can expand that. You can build on that with things like the collective licensing that CCC offer, with marketplace solutions. There are marketplaces for training data. You can expand that further with data that's in the public domain, like the 500 billion word data set common corpus of public domain text. You can expand that even further with synthetic data, in whatever Fairly Trained and others say, in which clearly much of this does not currently have copyright protection, or at least in certain jurisdictions it doesn't. So there are all of these options for where to get your training data. It's very much possible. There are a ton of licensing solutions out there, and frankly, the avoidance of licensing and the lobbying to get the law changed to make licensing not required, apart from all the other effects it would have, would kill this burgeoning AI training data licensing market, which I think can be a great thing and a great way for the AI industry and the creative industries to work together. So I hope it doesn't get killed by new legislation designed to favor AI companies and penalize copyright holders.
Thank you, Ed. Jillian?
So from a business perspective, I want to bring up again the shift in technology from 2022. The idea over the past couple of years has been bigger models, bigger models, bigger models. We need a bigger model to be able to do everything. But what I'm actually seeing in businesses is the big models are designed to be generalists. And as many people know in business, for a lot of tasks, you need specific knowledge. You need a certain set of skills and tools that are more focused, not being able to, create a recipe for lasagna in Pig Latin. You're trying to do some real business task to make your organization more efficient, to be able to work better and capitalize on the data that you have. You don't need all of that, is what a lot of the organizations that I work with are seeing. So they are using smaller models that are focused and fine-tuning smaller models on data that they've licensed that is either relevant to their specific industry or is relevant to perhaps even just a specific use case. If you have some, low-level task that can be accomplished by a local small model that you have on your own servers, that you are not paying for every single token that's going through to one of the model companies through an API, because you're trying to accomplish this small task, you might quickly see that it is much more economically feasible to license data, even for a specific task or use case or area of industry, than it is to pay for a more general model that is kind of designed to do everything. If you're able to license exactly the kind of content that you need, you not only get better results because you're not getting fan fiction when you're trying to do something that is a scientific task, or you don't need every blogger's recipe when you're trying to deal with processing financial documents. By being able to license content that is relevant to what you're actually trying to achieve, you get better results, and it can be much more financially efficient.
Excellent. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Let's take a few minutes to imagine ourselves into the future, a good scenario and maybe not a so good scenario. So let's call it 5 years out, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, and we got this right. Okay, we've taken, along with everybody on this call, we've all done our part and have moved the dial towards the ethically and responsibly trained AI and deployments of AIs as well. So that's the good model. What are our hopes and aspirations? What's amazing about that? Or the other scenario where we haven't been able to slow down what's happening right now there's just the outright taking protected content without clearing it. Maybe something has happened with legislation or court cases, and we're not gaining ground there. Now what's happening? What does the world look like in terms of impact on innovation and also impact on the creator community? Maybe Ed, you want to take us there?
I want to be clear and say that I think even in the good model, things don't look great for a lot of content creators. And I think that's important to be upfront about. I think that whatever happens, even in a world where generative AI licenses all its training data, you are going to get some job displacement over some period of time. And this is important to be transparent about. I think that in the good situation, more creators are able to continue monetizing their work and continue making a living from the hard work they've put in already for decades and will continue to put in, because AI companies are paying them. They are one of their revenue streams is as a provider for AI companies, paying them on training, paying them on inference when the models are used. There are multiple methods of reimbursement that I think are only fair, because after all, generative AI companies pay huge amounts of money for the other resources they use, the software engineering talent, up to $1 million per engineer, and the GPUs, the chips they train on, up to $1 billion per training run. So why should they not pay for their third resource and support the creative ecosystem? But as I say, I don't think it's not a silver bullet, and I don't think it has to be a silver bullet. I don't think it should be incumbent on the AI industry to solve all of creators' issues. Already creators face a very tough time in many respects. But I think, that's the good situation. You have more creators getting paid for longer in a fair way for their work. Ultimately, the bad situation, is we're starting to see the effect of already, where huge swathes of creators are rapidly outcompeted. You already have illustrators reporting their income falling by 33%. You already have white papers being written showing that tasks, like freelance jobs for writers, are declining precipitously. You have a lot of people being put out of work very rapidly, unjustly, their work being stolen to ultimately replace them. I know that sounds extreme, but that is, I think, an accurate reflection of what's happening. So that's the bad situation. And really, I think the difference lies in the number of creators and the amount of that creative bedrock, the bedrock of the creative industry that is able to monetize, to survive, and to continue supporting the rest of the creative ecosystem. Because I think without them, it's very, very hard to support that creative ecosystem at all.
Thank you. Jillian, is there anything you would like to these different future visions?
I think Ed did a nice job capturing that. And I, in full disclosure, tend to be a bit of a Debbie Downer generally. So I'll try to speak to first what it looks like if things go right. And I think things going right not only requires compensation with respect to licensed material. I think there's also an important element that is the sort of social capital that goes along with content that people have created. And as I'm more in the business space, I know Ed is more in the kind of art space. I want to make it clear that this is not just impacting people who are in creative industries. They are very much the first, I think, to be impacted. But this goes beyond that. This goes to a lot of white collar jobs. Knowledge workers are being significantly impacted. And so in terms of creation of materials, technical blog posts, insights on an analysis of things where people are experts, and they publish these things to be seen as experts to get that social capital and credibility. If we do things right, we're going to encourage that, and we're going to not only provide, answers through an LLM, we're going to direct people back to those original creators. That's kind of the ideal outcome. Yes, people are using these tools, but they're still saying, this is the original source where this information came from, these 10 sites. Maybe I want to learn more and I'm going to go to them. And there's a number of model providers that are already doing this with their thinking models. And that's a step in the right direction, in addition to being paid for the use of that content. So that's if things go well. If things don't go well, I think it has the potential to be very, very bad. It's untenable the way things are going now. The idea of copyright was to encourage creation of new materials and new ideas that would be protected for a time and then would ultimately enter the public domain. If there's no incentive for that creation because copyright doesn't actually protect the works, the incentive to create things is going to disappear. It's a lot of work for people to create art, to do research and write these papers. All of this, there needs to be some benefit. And if it's not there, and if the work is not protected, I think we're going to see people not only actually losing their jobs, but losing incentive to create for whatever reason was ultimately behind it. And I don't think that's a world that any of us want to be in.
So let's end on a empowering note by answering the following questions, which I think will also answer some of the questions that we're getting from the audience. What is the 2 or 3 kind of actionable piece of advice that you would give organizations that are looking to implement generative AI into their work, or working with organizations that are training AIs? What are those 2 or 3 actionable advice that you would give them? How to get started down this journey, down this path of ethical and responsible AI usage?
I would say, number one, wherever possible, try to use fairly trained models. It doesn't have to be certified by us. Do your own due diligence if necessary. Look at our criteria on our website and go do your own due diligence. Number two, where that's impossible, do whatever you can to encourage any other providers you use to follow these requirements. Make it clear that that is something you think is really important. And I guess number three, spread the word among your own employees. Do whatever you can to suggest the same things to them. And I think that's what I would say at the moment.
Thank you. Jillian, 2 to 3 important takeaways, things that people can do today.
So first, data governance. Again, know what data is in your systems, know what data is in the systems that you're utilizing from external sources, from third parties, whether it's models or tools that are utilizing an underlying LLM. So having good data governance and having practices in place is going to start you down the right path. Also, baby steps. If your organization is at a place where maybe you aren't using any kind of AI or LLMs, maybe you are using the big providers, and ultimately, you want to move in a more ethical and responsible direction, it may not be feasible, and it probably isn't feasible to jump straight into the deep end. That's a way to get everyone very discouraged and to get a lot of pushback on responsible practices. So my best advice is to start small, pick a specific use case, do a proof of concept where you can use more ethical models and data and practices to show that not only is this a viable option, but also it might be better for your business for the reasons I touched on previously. So, if you're trying to make the business case for doing this, that you don't have to rely on third parties with, with their APIs and their pay by the token arrangements. You can have something that's run on your own systems for which the costs are much more minimal. And if you do this for a specific use case where it's, properly aligned with the task you're trying to complete, you can show a success and kind of start a snowball effect from there, where once you have one win, it's a lot easier to get people in the organization on board with taking the next step towards more responsible practices.
Thank you. So most of the questions that I see in the chat are really around, where do I get more resources? So how do I educate myself? How do I educate my leadership? How do I educate my organization? So there's information on the Copyright Clearance Center website about this. There's information on the Fairly Trained website about this as well, like what's involved in a certification, which whether you decide to certify or not will give you the roadmap, right? Ed will give you the roadmap of what's necessary to do this the right way. Aliyah has information on its website as well. So please reach out to any of us and learn more about this. I want to thank you both again. This has been really, really informative. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us.